Welcome back to Comic Tropes. Today I want to go way far back into comic book history. We're going to look at a Golden Age comic. Now, sometimes it's almost too easy to make jokes at the expense of Golden Age comics because, they're dated. So the dialogue just doesn't sound right to us, the fashions and technology are dated, and generally the comics at the time were made on a much faster pace, so they weren't always given as much thought to, character arcs and world building and stuff. But, they were entertaining. But the comic I'm going to take a look at today, I think that you could generously call every single character in it a complete idiot. It's one of the most bizarre stories I've ever come across. So the Golden Age of comics ran from about 1938 to 1950. It was the superhero era. Superman was created in 1938, and superheroes were all the rage across every publisher, all the way through World War II and a few years past. We're going to specifically be looking at a comic book called Police Comics. That was an anthology. It ran from 1941 to 1953, essentially covering the complete Golden Age era. Before it sort of fizzled out, and that was mostly because its publisher, Quality Comics, also was having tough times in those last few years. And they actually ultimately sold all their characters and assets to DC Comics. So a lot of the stuff that Quality was publishing, you've heard of. I mean, they had Will Eisner's The Spirit. They had Jack Cole's Plastic Man. They had Manhunter, Human Bomb, Firebrand. These are all characters that DC has used. They're not always like the biggest characters, but everybody's heard of like Plastic Man, and hopefully you've heard of The Spirit by Will Eisner. I mean, that's a fantastic, fantastic comic. And in Police Comics, that was an anthology where you get short, like 6-page stories about each of these characters every month. So we're going to discuss a less well-known character that was created by a cartoonist named George Brenner. And his big claim to fame was that he, by most accounts, illustrated the first hero to wear a mask in comics. That was the Clock. So, of course, we'd had characters like Zorro, who else? The Shadow. They had been big pulp heroes. So they'd been in pulp magazines where there'd be illustrations on the cover, but it's not the same as comics. We're talking comics, and George Brenner created the Clock, who wore a mask, so that was sort of a first. And this guy sort of wears a mask. The character we're going to be discussing is called 7-Eleven. Nope, not that 7-Eleven. This is a guy that was called 7-Eleven, you'll see why. And he beat the store by about 5 years, because this guy came out in 1941, and 7-Eleven didn't name itself that until about 1946. So, just a weird coincidence. But these are short stories, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much literally read them to you because they're so short. I'm going to read the first issue, his origin, and then one of his later issues where he fights a very strange villain. Very strange indeed. You know what? Without further ado, let's just read this story. 2 years ago, two men speak in low, muffled tones. One, Jake Horn, is criminally weak-minded with a record of 2 convictions. A third means life imprisonment. The other, Daniel Dice, is a promising young attorney and lifelong friend of Horn's. The cops will be here in a few minutes. You gotta help me, Dan, for my wife's sake. For Mary? Yes, in a couple of days she's gonna have a baby. She's been swell to me, and the least I can do is be around to comfort her. What do you want me to do, Jake? Take the rap for me. What? If you're a young district attorney and your friend asks you to go to jail for him, the correct answer is no. You're going to get him help. You'll see that Dan doesn't make the same decision. Just till the baby's born, Dan, then I'll give myself up. Honest, I will. We look alike. It can be done. I'm a loser, and this is the first decent thing I can do. Please. I'll do it. These are two lifelong friends that just happen to look so similar, no one can tell them apart. That happens. You guys all have a friend that looks just like you, right? Dice goes to court and goes to prison for his friend, assuming that somehow they'll be able to swap places later. And while he's there, he is assigned convict number 711. I say 711 because that's what I'm used to saying, but yeah, that is his prisoner number. Then, one day, a few lines in a remote corner of a newspaper attract Dice's eye. Pedestrian killed. Jacob Horn, on his way to see his wife and newborn son, was instantly killed by a hit-and-run motorist as he was crossing Naveen Ave today. Jake killed. That means I'm in prison for life. Consider what this article implies. The newspaper is saying Jacob Horn was killed. But Jacob Horn is supposed to be in prison. That means that Dan Dice could presumably set himself free. I mean, I guess he'd probably get disbarred for what he did, but he could at least not serve a life sentence in prison. Fingerprints had been used by the police here in America since basically the early 1900s. Right around like 1902, 1903, police agencies started using fingerprints. So this guy could get himself off. And he's electing to stay in prison because he figures no one remembers who he is. Then, little by little, the grim number 711 tunnels his way toward freedom. And one day he is free at last. But I'm forgotten by now. I'm no longer Dan Dice. I'm number 711, and my place is back behind these walls. So his whole family and all his friends forgot him within a couple days? And even if they did, so what? Just free yourself. You don't have to be in prison, you idiot. A bunch of the prisoners are talking about Slick Panzer, the smoothest crook in the game, who just got arrested. And the inmates are all arguing, hey, he can't be so smooth if the cops nabbed him. And they say, no, you don't understand. Yeah, didn't you hear how he swindled widows and orphans out of $250,000? He hid that dough, figuring to take a year's rap for the job. When his time's up, he leaves and lives like a king. That's what I call smooth. Dan overhears this and decides that he'll bump into this Slick. He's not going to let this slide. Oops. Watch where you're going, you stir-crazy hophead. I said it would be too easy to make fun of the language of the time, but, you know, I wish people still called each other stir-crazy hopheads. Prison life's already getting on your nerves, eh, Panzer? Why, you You what? They get into a fight, but a guard runs in and Slick says, give me your gun, guard, and I'll blast that punk. Oh, a hard guy, eh? Get going, the two of you, to the warden's office. Slick is placed in solitary for threatening to shoot a man with a gun that he never had control of, so I don't know why he got punished that harshly. And a brick starts to slide out of the wall. He's like, that noise, there's rats in here. And then standing in front of him is, who we will soon learn, 711 in his, we'll call it a superhero costume. It's basically a suit with a cloak, a hat, that's it. Basically a suit and a hat with a cloak. He could be anybody. Where did he get this while he's in prison? Also, it was already impressive enough that Dan tunneled his way out of prison without being noticed, but he also figured a way to sneak into solitary? This guy's got this place scoped out like Michael Scofield in Prison Break. How'd you get in here, 711? I'll ask the questions. Where's that dough you've got hidden? Make me talk, you. With pleasure. I'll talk! He gave that up real fast. The dough's guarded by one of my boys in an old warehouse on Pier 13. Thanks. This is so you won't know how I come and go. And he knocks him out. 711 sneaks out of prison, heads to the warehouse, and leaves a calling card for the guard to find. The calling card? Yeah, it's a mirror with bars printed over it so that when the criminal looks at it, he'll see himself behind bars. Yeah, hi, thank you very much for accepting the charges. A quick question, do you make business cards? You do, perfect. Let me ask this, could you print them on mirrors? Right, no, I do understand that it would be very expensive. That's no problem. But let me ask you this, do you deliver to prisons? 711 then jumps in, knocks out the guard, and takes the money as well as a list of the people that were swindled by Slick, and he gives it to apparently the new district attorney. Or maybe it was the existing district attorney and somehow his hat prevents him from recognizing his assistant district attorney? Like I said, everybody in this is an idiot. The next day at noon recess, I hear that mysterious number 711 gave back all that dough to the people Panzer swindled. Yeah, and they say he beat up the 5 guys that was guarding it.
No, there was only one guy guarding that money.
Now how did he know that? I just got word that it was one guy, and he's being sent here to do a stretch for his part in the crime. That's the catchphrase that ends every issue. Now how did he know that? But if this criminal had even half a brain, maybe even just a quarter of a brain, he might be able to put this together. He is talking about 7-Eleven stopping some criminals. Dan talks to him, turns around, and as we've seen before, on his back is printed in gigantic block letters, 7-Eleven. No one can figure this mystery out. Now we're moving on to his next story, where he goes up against an actual supervillain of sorts. A weird figure slinks along deserted docks. Cat-like through the fog, he makes his way toward an old shack.
The Brickbat! So soon?
Yes, I grow impatient. Is it ready? Does it work perfectly? Will it leave no clues? Is it everything I want it to be?
Yes to all your questions, and to those it is used on, death will be quick.
Good, let me see one.
A brick-like death-dealing object is handed to the Brickbat.
Why do you look like that?
I'm wondering if it will work.
Yes, it will.
I'll prove it.
How?
Like this.
Ah! It's kind of appropriate that 7-Eleven's enemy is a guy that throws bricks, poison bricks, and has called himself the Brickbat. Do you also like this supervillain's getup? He basically has Batman's cowl, except instead of covering the nose, it's cut above the nose, kind of like Captain America's cowl, but the ears are the same, the eye holes. I mean, it looks like Batman's running around throwing bricks at people. And by the way, if you throw a brick and hit someone, it's likely to kill them. You don't need to add poison on top of that brick. It's not the most efficient way to kill people. Guns have been known to work. Apparently the Brickbat is happy with this weapon because he feels like it won't leave any clues, but I really don't understand that, since anybody could analyze the chemicals that were used. Brickbat ends up in the newspapers, and this is great. The warden has prisoner 7-Eleven, Dan, cleaning his office. And the warden says, Dan, I'd like to see this Brickbat guy occupying one of my cells. While this guy's name, 7-Eleven's real name, is Dan Dice, he's pretending to be Jack Horn. As far as anybody knows, it's Jack Horn that's in prison. I've read all the issues between this. He never explains, hey warden, I'm secretly Dan. I used to be a district attorney. He never explains that. So either everybody's an idiot and they can't remember names, or the warden absolutely knows who this guy is, and he's still like, hey, if this guy wants to stay in prison, who am I to kick him out? The warden hands Dan the paper to read. Since he's done with it, Dan reads about the Brickbat, and he says,
Pretty ruthless, eh, warden?
Yes, Dan, now you can go and get ready for supper. After supper, 7-Eleven walks in the yard.
After the last checkup tonight, I'll see what can be done about this devil.
So, 7-Eleven sneaks out of prison as usual, puts on his disguise, which is, again, really just a suit, and goes to find the Brickbat. At the same time, the Brickbat is at work again. You've got my fortune. Spare my life. Don't throw that thing.
Why not? You're ruined and too old to recoup your fortunes. You're better off dead, fool. So die.
And another victim dies at the ruthless hands of the killer. Having heard where the Brickbat hides out, 7-Eleven waits patiently for his return. That's right, 7-Eleven just heard where the Brickbat lives. He didn't have to rough up criminals, apparently. He didn't have to eavesdrop in prison. He just heard where the Brickbat lives. Not the most capable supervillain, is he?
A few hauls like this, and I'll quit.
I'll go in. You're through now, Brickbat.
Huh? Not yet, I'm not, but you are!
7-Eleven races across the room and stops in front of a window. And then he just dodges all the bricks that Brickbat throws. They all go out the window. And Brickbat is stunned by this. He says,
What the? I used them all, and he's still standing.
Yes, dope. Why do you think I made it my business to get in front of a window? Now I'll start throwing, but it'll be knuckles, and I won't miss.
Throwing some serious shade. His banter isn't the best, but at least he's being a dick about it. 1, 2, 3, 4 punches, and the Brickbat is knocked out.
Now to get this bird to the police, and get myself back in prison before I'm caught.
The next morning, 7-Eleven enters the warden's office.
Morning, Dan. Morning, Warden. Say, Warden, you expressed a desire to have the Brickbat occupy a cell here, didn't you? Yeah. Well, you'll have your wish.
That's good. Let's not joke until I've looked over the mail. Say, this is to inform me that the Brickbat is on his way under guard. Where did you get that information?
Maybe I'm psychic. That's it, Warden. I'm psychic.
Now, how did he know that? 7-Eleven didn't kill the Brickbat. Presumably, the Brickbat will tell the authorities, and this information will make its way to the warden that 7-Eleven arrested him. Dan is still wearing a big shirt that says 7-Eleven. No one can figure this out, and Dan can't figure out a good reason why he shouldn't just leave prison. I think I just had an aneurysm. This is insane. I feel like this is an idea that has an element of something cool to it. A criminal that would hear what other criminals are talking about. That's kind of cool. But if it's an innocent man who's in jail and can get out, and he's not even the guy that was like arrested, you know, it's not like he was convicted of a crime he didn't commit. He's taking the rap for someone else. He could clear his name instantly. There's got to be somebody at work that knows who he is. He was a district attorney, or at least an assistant district attorney. Presumably, at least his secretary would go like, oh yeah, that's my boss. This is just stunning. I mean, did he have the same fingerprints and blood type as his childhood friend, Jack Horner? This comic just blows my mind. I love it. I cannot get enough. I've read all of the 7-Eleven stories, and they're all the same. It's just him overhearing something in prison about a bad guy, sneaking out so that the guy gets arrested, and then not even hinting, like basically outright telling them like, hey, I think 7-Eleven arrested that guy at the police station last night. And they're like, how did he know that? I hope you enjoyed this quick episode. Just decided to throw a small one together in the middle of this week. If you want to talk about comics, talk about what you want to see on this channel, we've got a Facebook page. The link's in the description, so take a look at that. That's a fun place to either talk about what the episode's been about. You can tell me I want to see this creator or this character reviewed, and I'll definitely take a note of that. There's also a link to the Patreon here. You don't have to support that, but if you do, I promise all that money goes towards buying editing equipment, lights, comic books. I'm actually in the process of building a small set for the show with a friend of mine who's an just amazing woodworker. So I'm pretty excited about that. That'll take a little while, so don't expect it right away. But got some good plans in the works. And anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. And until next week, keep reading comics.